Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Patriots, wherever you are. Welcome to the 100th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SGAnon. Well, Patriots, I have to say, it's been quite a while since we've been on air together in this format, a number of months now, as a crazy 2025 finally concluded and gave way to a pretty interesting beginning of 2026. But I think now that we're out of the year of the snake and moving into a new period of time and a new season under the stars and the heavens, things are finally beginning to level out and calm down in my world. I was thinking about it before I began recording this audio file that it's been a while since we've been on air together, but really it's been over a year since we've had a conversation of consequence that was not marred by distractions and burdens and ongoing events happening in my personal world, which really made it difficult to focus on the research, analysis, and commentary that I like to bring to each and every one of you. I'm confident as we go forward that these events are now fully behind us. There may be some straggling moments here and there, and I would ask you to bear with me on that. But otherwise, it's going to be a very exciting 250th birthday year here for all of us in the United States of America. For those of you who are wondering about the events of 2025, I'm not going to drag all of you through a recap of those events. You can find the announcement that I made regarding what happened in my personal world last year on the other social media profiles that are out there, as well as a video that was placed on this Rumble channel around the 4th of December, 2025. If you'd like to review that, you're certainly welcome to. We have a few updates that we're going to start with, some changes that are coming to Q News Patriot, which many of you, I think, are going to be very excited and eager to hear about. And then we're going to dive right into a dramatic file today where there's a lot of research and analysis about things happening in the world, the shadow war for control and destiny of the planet, and really of mankind's mental and spiritual future continues to wage on. Patriots, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into some of those updates. So the first place we're going to start, Patriots, is with respect to some changes that are coming to the Q News Patriot podcast itself after the events of February 12th, 2026, where the Q News Patriot official X account was suspended and deplatformed without cause or reason given, and then suddenly reinstated again with no cause or reason. It occurred to Laura and myself that we really needed to begin establishing a broader foothold for the Q News Patriot podcast and overall content online. Towards that end, we're going to create an official Q News Patriot YouTube channel, which is not quite ready for public launch yet, but is in the build out phase, as well as a website, which you'll find in the description box of the audio files and audio chats at the present time. The hope with this is that by diversifying and increasing the digital battlefield fronts on which the Q News Patriot operates, it will become difficult and eventually impossible for any one platform or ideologically captured group to shut down the messaging which we put out on this show. Another update, Patriots, coming to the QNP podcast as a whole deals specifically with the audio files, and this one I know many of you will very much enjoy hearing about. Most, if not all of you, are aware that over the last 15 to 18 months, we've experimented with some mid-roll ad reads inserted in the audio files from partners who I had personally tested and vetted. The response to this change was obviously mixed, with many of you enjoying the additional information about things you could research and try for yourself, and others complaining that the reads disrupted the continuity and the clarity of the files, making them harder to follow along as you went about your activities. After much reflection on this topic, I've decided to once again remove all ads, commercials, and promotions from the audio files apart from the ones that are placed by Rumble, which I have no control over. Beginning with this 100th file and continuing into the future in perpetuity, you can expect an uninterrupted listening experience on the files themselves. For those who would like to continue hearing about and connecting with some of those former file partners, you'll still be able to find those reads included in the Q News Patriot audio chats, which will return again in force in March of this year. And lastly, Patriots, please be patient with how I sound today. I'm still not fully recovered from a pretty virulent illness that struck me and my family over the last 5 weeks, and I'm well aware that my voice probably sounds like a horse with a bad head cold. If you'll indulge me with some patience and some understanding, I think that you'll leave the file today feeling encouraged, perhaps a bit trepidatious, and very excited for the events that are about to unfold, both in the international space and right here at home in the USA. Without waiting any longer, Patriots, let's go ahead and dive into the irregular war for the destiny of the entire Earth. As we start our discussion today, Patriots, it occurred to me that the best place to begin might first be to re-examine the idea that there is a white hat versus black hat shadow war being fought that there is a plan to save the world, which ties back to an entity called Q, and that humanity-focused patriots are still in control of certain levers of geopolitical power, finance, and military might, which would make such a plan possible. Over the last year, many of us have found our faith in such an idea probably deeply tested. And with what my child and I went through personally in that same time period, I'm certainly including myself in that group. But from the 2025 administration's handling of certain international terrorist states and their foreign lobbies inside the government apparatus here in the U.S. homeland, really all the way down to the local level, to the application of U.S. military force in ways that don't really seem compatible with the idea of America first. There's a lot of patriots who have become civically active for the very first time just over the last 4 years that are spinning their mental wheels about what all of this means and ultimately where all of it's going to go. I cannot stress enough to each of you that without examining these changes and what's happening in the world over the last year, and really over the last 9 years, with an espionage way of thinking or an unconventional way of looking at things, there is no solution that is going to adequately account for the differences between statements that are made publicly by Trump and his administration and the ground level events that are happening both in the U.S. homeland and worldwide. But if we take that 80,000-foot view, Patriots, and place a spotlight on those small details, it is unquestionable that not only is that so-called Q plan still in effect and still driving the decisions that we're seeing both across the world and from the Trump administration itself, but it is ultimately being done with the mindset that short-term pain may be needed to fully extinguish the devil-worshipping black magic cancer which has afflicted humanity for millennia. And success with this will yield us an unending, permanently secure, and stable long-term future for God's beautiful humanity. Many of these small details I'm talking about are rooted in concepts like pattern recognition and statistical probability. They're not going to be publicly proclaimed or a lot of public attention drawn to them, and they can be found in less than a couple of minutes online using basic internet search engines like Google or Bing. To show you what I mean, I'm going to take a moment here and walk you all through a micro sample of headlines and news content that have been put out by various information sources just over the last 28 days. And when I say micro, I really mean these examples are only a tiny fraction of the hundreds of results that fit the same pattern over that same short time frame. If you adjust your search settings to include results from the last 12 months total, those hundreds will turn into thousands. Give me just a second, Patriots, to pull these up. I think you're really going to enjoy this segment. All right, Patriots, beginning on the 27th of January of this year, 2026, and continuing forward until today, the 23rd of February, I'm going to take each of you through a number of different headlines and content found in news articles from all over the web, showcasing a pattern that I think is going to be very obvious for each of you to see. And it is the statistical improbability that such a pattern would continue to emerge again and again and again that compels me to conclude that there is a design to it, that there is an architecture of some kind, there's a purposeful orchestration happening out there. And we have to keep in mind, purposeful orchestration doesn't necessarily mean right down to the nitty details of any one thing. It simply means an orchestration in the worldwide geopolitical and other conditions that are necessary to produce such a pattern over and over again. So beginning on the 27th of January, an article from the New York Times, this is a headline from the New York Times, $17 billion in FEMA aid to states held up by extra scrutiny. Around $17 billion in federal disaster funds for states is getting an extra layer of review by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. This article coming from Yahoo Finance on the 2nd of February, why a $17 million ETF exit might signal a shift toward higher conviction assets. On January the 22nd, Strong Tower Advisory Services reported selling out its entire stake in the FM U.S. Treasury 3-month bill ETF, an estimated $17 million trade based on the last disclosed position value. This article also coming from Yahoo Finance on February the 9th, approximately a week later. Takeda deepens AI drug discovery push with $1.7 billion Iambic deal. Privately held Iambic said on Monday it has entered a multi-year partnership worth more than $1.7 billion with Japan's Takeda Pharmaceutical to use AI to help design small molecule drugs targeting cancer and gastrointestinal diseases. Under the agreement, Iambic will receive upfront payments and could earn more than $1.7 billion in development and commercial milestones plus royalties on sales. This article coming from MSN.com, if you can believe that, on the 10th of February, Pressaball USA to invest $17 million in Scraven County facility or Screven County. From Sylvania, Georgia, a $17 million manufacturing investment will bring 65 new jobs to Screven County over the next several years, Governor Brian Kemp announced on Friday. This article is actually a short video excerpt taken from MSN.com, and this on the 11th of February, so the very next day. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter isn't just another military aircraft, it's the most expensive U.S. weapons program in history. Projected lifetime costs reach, according to figures, $1.7 trillion, a scale of investment that is almost impossible to grasp. This article coming from 100%fedup.com from February the 15th, 2026. Fannie Willis contests President Trump and co-defendants' $17 million request for attorney fees. This article coming from MetroTVOnline.com, February the 16th, 2026. A $17 million gold deal turns sour as Turkish firm petitions the local criminal investigative division over missing funds. A Turkish gold buyer has petitioned the Police Criminal Investigations Department over an alleged $17 million gold transaction gone wrong, claiming millions of dollars remain unaccounted for and that agreed quantities of gold were never delivered. This article coming directly from the U.S. website, or excuse me, the U.S. government website. I believe this is the Bureau of Economic Analysis from the U.S. Department of Commerce. The title of the publication, it's not an article, it's a press release, I apologize. The title of the publication looks to be Thursday, February 19, or the date of Thursday, February 19, 2026, and the title is U.S. International Trade in Goods and Services, December and Annual over 2025. And if we come down through here, we find some interesting numbers. Services deficit through exports contracted only 1.7% for fiscal year 2025. I come down here a little bit further. Average imports decreased 10.7 or 107 billion from December of 2024, and exports of goods decreased 5.5 billion in December, 5.5 or 5 by 5. This article coming from the Times of Israel. Trump announces $17 billion in pledges for Gaza at the inaugural Board of Peace. Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Albania, and others agree to contribute to Gaza Security Force. Project hinges on disarmament of Hamas, which will soon be presented with proposal. This article coming from Bloomberg.com, February 23rd, so just today. New Genius ETF sees a massive $17 billion inflow. Simeon Hyman, global investment strategist at ProShares, joins Scarlett Fu and Eric Balkunas on Bloomberg ETF IQ to discuss the firm's GENIUS money market ETF, which last week led all U.S. inflows with more than $17 billion. The fund invests in short-term U.S. government securities that qualify as eligible reserves under the Genius Act. And the last sample here, Patriots, and again, there's hundreds of these, but just for the sake of brevity, our last sample I'm going to highlight. This article from freerepublic.com. Binance employees find $1.7 billion in crypto was sent to Iranian entities. A group of internal investigators at the giant cryptocurrency exchange Binance made a series of startling discoveries late last year. People in Iran had gained access to more than 1,500 accounts on the Binance platform over a 12-month period. Around $1.7 billion had flowed from only 2 Binance accounts to Iranian entities with links to known terrorist groups, a violation of global sanctions, and one of those accounts belonged to a Binance vendor. So, Patriots, not only is it statistically impossible to have the same set of integers appearing basically constantly all across completely unrelated domains of society, and all in such a short time period, but we can extrapolate a lot of detail about how the worldwide shadow war is progressing from this pattern and what holdouts or problem areas still exist for patriots who are trying their hardest to keep humanity's boat afloat. For example, did you notice in the last article that we referenced which talked about Binance, that not only was $1.7 billion sent to Iranian entities having, quote, terrorist organization links, end quote, but that those outgoing monies were issued from only two accounts. To sweeten that pot even more, if you read further into the article, you'll discover that Binance terminated the internal investigators who had discovered those transactions and who were still conducting their investigation to determine who those accounts belonged to. All of this comes after Binance as an organization pled guilty to violating U.S. money laundering laws in 2023. And the best part of that particular sequence of events is that President Trump pardoned Binance founder Changpeng Zhao last year for his role in those exact violations. In other words, the former head of Binance himself can no longer invoke the U.S. Fifth Amendment when questioned at any point in the future about how those violations occurred, where the money went, who gave the orders, who was involved, and so on. And if we couple that with the 2025 revelations that someone or a few someones is still using Binance as a pass through to evade U.S. Treasury sanctions and literally fund terrorism in the Middle East, you can see how the game board is being set up to completely decimate deep state operations in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, including through the application of RICO law and U.S. military containment mechanisms, while simultaneously establishing civilian precedents and safeguard that will secure those decentralized next-gen monetary systems into the future. It's positively incredible to see, Patriots. It's also no accident that the dollars in question here were sent to Iran specifically. Ancient Persia has been resolutely in control of the Canaanite Luciferian deep state for almost the last 100 years solid, if you count the first revolution where CIA, MI6, and Mossad overthrew the ancestral monarchy inside of Tehran and proceeded to move Western oil corporations into the country the very next year. Iran has been a favorite boogeyman of choice for the dark occultists for a long time. And when you look at what ancient Persia did to the former Babylonian Empire, and then again with the Moloch worshiping Assyrians and the satanic Greeks of old, it's really not hard to figure out why. If you remember, it was secret Iranian nuclear sites which were targeted inside Syria by the first Trump administration, not chemical weapons like the world was told. And those sites were allegedly weaponizing enriched U.S. uranium from the very same stockpiles that had been sold to Russia under the Clinton Uranium One deal, which was orchestrated by none other than the satanic witch of Washington herself. It was also Iran who became the fulcrum point for the Luciferian leverage on and the life insurance against the Obama administration for everything from stolen elections to smuggled U.S. military secrets, adrenochrome trafficking out of mainland China across Eurasia and into Europe, CIA war crimes that were committed against U.S. military service members for a number of years under that administration, and a hidden satanic financial system that was completely isolated from the rest of the world's commerce, except for two junction nodes held in North Korea and Russian private banks, which were majority owned by Rothschild-aligned Russian oligarchs. In short, Patriots, Iran has long been and still is one of the foundational cornerstones that the worldwide deep state Hydra has relied on for almost a century. And we should not be surprised at what we're currently seeing in that area of the world with respect to the positioning of an armada of U.S. military ships, planes, equipment, hardware, and etc. But I would submit to each of you that this buildup is not because President Trump is pressuring Iran to make a deal regarding their weapons program, since they already have nuclear weapons and have had them for a long time. And I also don't think there's some big impending U.S. invasion of mainland Iran itself, like many of the panicans would have you believe. Instead, I feel that what's about to happen is actually occurring for three separate but interrelated reasons, and which, when taken together, would provide white hat military patriots a direct and rapid path to simultaneously resolve a host of remaining threats and obstacles to humanity's freedom, not just for the Middle East, but worldwide. The first of these deals with the idea of splintering the hegemony of Western backed international finance markets through the permanent elimination of that closed loop satanic monetary system I referenced just a moment ago. No one listening to this broadcast or others like it is going to be unfamiliar with the Strait of Hormuz and how a huge swath of worldwide energy markets is profoundly dependent on it. It's obvious that any major conflict involving Iran would shatter the stability of the strait and either disrupt or prevent basically all seafaring commerce into and out of the Arabian Gulf. But how many are also aware that in addition to oil and energy and general resource markets, nearly the entire Middle East, including Iran, as well as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and yes, Israel too, all play host to underground or submarine conclaves of alien life, as well as advanced geothermal and dimensional physics technologies, and more than 30% of the known technological infrastructure, which allows for current worldwide trading markets to transact with one another across boundary lines, including reconciling their ledger books and moving physical goods and services from one place to another. If a major war were to break out, spanning from the Mediterranean Sea to the mountains of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and presumably involving most or all of the significant powers in between, the old world international systems of commerce and finance would receive an overnight gut punch, as everything from Africa to India to China, Hong Kong, Japan, and even the Koreas would be affected almost immediately. We're talking about the potential destruction of submarine cable systems in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman, the closure of the Hormuz Strait and the Suez Canal, the Western corporate world's technological nexuses in both Tel Aviv and Haifa being taken offline either through direct assault or through a byproduct of these events, the ceasing of physical exports and shipments coming out of both China and India through their traditional routes, and that would include everything from silver to grains to gold, rare earth minerals, lumber, health technologies, robotics. All of it would be temporarily paralyzed, and this would almost certainly cascade into a short-lived effect across markets in East Asia and the Pacific Rim. The disruption this would cause specifically to China's currency markets would be like a haymaker to Europe and NATO, who have become all but dependent on the currency manipulation and cheap goods and resources that are flowing out of that Asian superpower. And while I'm not a financial advisor or a prophet, it's not hard to glean what would happen to North American markets and U.S. domestic markets in particular under these circumstances. The second significant reason I believe we're going to see a conflict in the Middle East very soon deals exclusively with the shadow government control of several of those nations. And we're not just talking about Iran or Syria or Yemen. Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon, Azerbaijan, and Israel are all either partially or totally controlled by hidden power structures that have never once been discussed on a news broadcast. For example, did you know that modern day Iran is actually run by a secret brotherhood that maintains a council of 22 members inside the country? The council meets in the south of Tehran in an underground bunker several times per year, and its members include agents of the Israeli Mossad, the Shin Bet, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Hezbollah, and high ranking persons from the Iranian military. Israel itself has a similar control structure with a secret council of 13 government and military members who hold meetings at various underground bunker and tunnel system locations, including beneath the population center of Tel Aviv, underneath the mountains on the outskirts of Old Jerusalem, and under the ancient Jerusalem Temple Mount itself, which is the modern day site of Islam's Al Aqsa Mosque. Other covens of this kind and ilk exist in almost every culture across the Middle East, and they are all loyal to the same unifying evil that has been torturing humanity's children for millennia. To pull them out into the open for purposes of prosecuting or destroying them without a kinetic military conflict would be like trying to suck deadly venom out of a wound after the toxin has spread to the entirety of the body. After a certain point, you're going to have no choice but to administer an antivenom. And to keep with the extended metaphor, the antivenom in this example would be the overwhelming chaos, confusion, and fear that results from a military confrontation, which the Viper's brood doesn't see coming, along with the simultaneous destruction of all of their hidden minions throughout the entire region. This is why you've seen President Trump meet almost nonstop with Arab world leaders going back to early 2025, as well as the Polish Israeli prime minister multiple times in that same period. What's about to happen in the Middle East is going to test the nerves of the patriots in every nation involved, while at the same time exposing very plainly their internal traitors to their civilian populations. And ultimately, the outcome from all of this will be a legitimate and complete self determination for each of those nations and cultures as they finally break away from the death grip of the worldwide Luciferian Hydra. The third and biggest reason I think we're going to see a major Middle East conflict pretty imminently, Patriots, and the one that will likely be what we remember about it going forward, is the exposure and elimination of secret nuclear weapon technology and research programs inside of both Iran and Israel. The former of the two achieved nuclear weapons capability under the administration of the 44th U.S. president between 11 and 14 years ago, so it's not going to come as any major surprise when Iranian silos in the south and northwest of the country, as well as the one underneath Karg Island, implode on themselves in small yield-style meltdowns after being hit by Israeli first strike attacks. And make no mistake, it will be Israel who starts the war, and who is likely to do so very soon after President Trump's State of the Union. But the thing which I believe will truly appall the onlooking international community, and which will result in a multi state Arab coalition taking up arms against Israel, will be the savagery that Israel displays in the first 72 to 96 hours of the conflict. I recently shared a post on social media that was put out on an online forum board by an anonymous account whose profile picture was an image of the logo for the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. I'm not suggesting at all that the CIA is suddenly operating on behalf of humanity and giving us a heads up. Quite the opposite, actually. I evaluated that post and two others like it, which were all put out within 96 hours of each other by the same account, to be more of a desperate plea for additional information, as well as a best guess at what may be coming to their den of snakes in that area of the world. And when the enemy is quietly consulting the general public internet for feedback, tips, pointers, or context clues, we can safely say that all of the right people are deeply afraid of something which they are convinced is coming and which they know will spell disaster for their campaigns of plunder and death for the entirety of the planet. Additionally, if we look at the constellation of American military assets that have been sent to that region, as well as to the Eastern Mediterranean and in Central Europe as well, we not only find the typical and conventional warfighting repertoire, but a significant number of nuclear sniffing and ballistic missile deterrent technologies, including at least one doomsday bird that was caught over Southeast Europe on transponder about 5 days ago. When all of this gets combined into the cauldron of my analysis, I think I'm prepared to say to each of you that I believe Israel is going to become the first nation on earth to use nuclear weapons in conflict since the year 1945. And I believe these weapons will be used in the first strike attacks targeting underground facilities across the Iranian landscape, including bunkers beneath Tehran, Karg Island, and research facilities in both the northwest and deep south of the country. Not only will this completely expose the government of Israel as a lying, deceptive, and bloodthirsty regime, but it will instantly galvanize all world opinion against the fabled Jewish state, which I remind you is not a nation at all, but rather a British corporation still registered to Kensington Palace Green in London, with the Windsor and Rothschild families named as controlling interests and stakeholders. China is likely to take steps to reinforce its interests in Afghanistan and Turkmenistan as a result of this, including the provision of military and economic support. India is likely to do an about face from its recent cozying up to Netanyahu's government, and may even use the confusion as an opportunity to seize territory that has long been contested between themselves and Pakistan. Moscow will condemn the whole thing with a particularly scathing attitude towards Israel, but I think they're unlikely to enter the fray as things kick off because of their designs on the Baltic states and the remainder of Ukraine. North African nations, including Egypt, are likely to condemn Israel's actions, but will probably be more inclined to distance themselves publicly and thus remain uninvolved. And I believe this approach will catalyze populist movements across all of those nations, including Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Morocco, as cultural identity and ancestry will ignite against the post-colonial status quo bureaucracy. Another thing this sequence of events would cause is an overnight recoil from the entirety of the Western world, and from the USA in particular. And I think that US President Donald Trump would be forced to acknowledge publicly that America's so-called greatest ally is actually the single largest obstacle to any substantial and lasting peace, not only for the Middle East, but for the entirety of the planet. It will affirm long-standing suspicions that Israel obtained nuclear technology dishonestly by way of espionage and silent war campaigns conducted inside the U.S. homeland and aimed at high-level U.S. military circles, and will spark a firestorm of conversation across the U.S. population as to how this so-called greatest ally was able to steal closely guarded U.S. military secrets with total impunity and then hide it for decades with no repercussions from any American president since John F. Kennedy himself. We know from declassified archives released in 2025, for example, related directly to the assassination of President Kennedy, that the Israeli intelligence service was not only involved in that murder directly, in league with the US CIA, but that Kennedy, around the time of the assassination, was actively seeking to force Israel to discontinue its nuclear program. These dots, I think, will connect at great speed and with great conviction across the consciousness of the population of the United States of America, particularly in evangelical Christian groups who have been bathed in military-grade propaganda from the pulpit every Sunday for more than 50 years. And ultimately, it's going to result in a profound rejection and a public disdain of all things Israel inside the U.S. media and government landscape. I think a large and far-reaching false flag attack in response is a significant possibility as this public rejection occurs, and I still stand by the prediction that I made more than 18 months ago that significant landmarks in both Washington, D.C., in New York, and probably California as well could be struck with sky-based weapon systems in such a scenario, including rogue missiles or even aircraft again weaponized. We've seen this once before, obviously, when a domestic missile launched from an Israeli submarine that was hiding in the Potomac River struck the Office of Management and Budget as well as Naval Intelligence inside the U.S. Pentagon on 9/11. And whether or not a false flag attack happens concurrent with this conflict or comes later or perhaps even not at all, which would be great, something I am not unsure about at all is that deep cover Israeli aligned agents and other foreign operatives operating inside that aforementioned media and government landscape are going to be rapidly and very publicly exposed as having never cared about America or MAGA from the very beginning, as their bribed and ideological fealty for a warmongering Middle Eastern country becomes cartoonish to watch for the average onlooker, both in scope and in scale. This Israel-Iran conflict will also demonstrate to the world beyond any doubt that Tel Aviv has intentionally and purposefully been given a decades-long free pass by the very international institutions charged with ensuring compliance from all countries who are not signed on to the 1971 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. According to current international law, the handful of countries who are not signatories to the treaty are required to renounce the development of atomic weapons. And once this conflict kicks off, it will implode any and all notion that the old world architecture is remotely capable of fairness, honesty, or the preservation of and enforcement of peacekeeping around the planet. And perhaps most importantly, above all else, is that these events will almost certainly tee up the ground invasion of Israel that we talked about on this show more than 2 years ago, which will be spearheaded by the army of Turkey, but probably supported for the first time in history by a coalition of both Sunni and Shiite Arab nations united together under a common cause. Such a coalition would likely include what remains of the regular armed forces of Lebanon and Syria, as well as the Saudi Arabian Air Force, and hundreds of Iranian drones, ballistic missiles, and ground equipment launched by friendly proxies positioned all over the Middle East. In my opinion, this is why you have so much of the U.S. military either already there or on their way there now, specifically to contain the conflict and keep it from reaching the U.S. homeland and Central Europe, while also preventing it from spiraling into an all-out nuke-for-nuke exchange between deep state power structures who have truly nothing left to lose. Now, I know that's a lot to take in, Patriots, and I also know that it can sound frightening or even downright scary to think of a nuclear conflict breaking out right before our eyes here in the 21st century. But I would submit to all of you that Q's plan to save the world, which we spoke about in the very beginning of today's file, must have the ultimate objective of transforming an old world that was built on deception, evil, and black magic into a new world built on transparency, honesty, justice, fairness, and truth. And that kind of a 180-degree change cannot be secured long term without reclaiming the things which can be reformed and adjusted, sometimes through force, and then destroying those which cannot. To think of it another way, in order to create a beautiful and decadent dessert, such as a wedding cake or a remarkable pastry, all of the ingredients must not only be present in the bowl before going into the oven, but they must be handled with violence first before they can be handled with delicacy. Eggs have to be broken and beaten severely, and then combined with ingredients like butter and sugar before being whisked and tossed around by the mixer. Pastry dough has to be stretched to its limits, and then folded over on itself and stretched to its limits again, and then again, and then again. The actual cooking process for any bakery good requires intense heat and sometimes pressure, which is enough to cause an instant and harsh burn to the chef if his or her hands are not protected. Even the Bible itself tells us that true gemstones are made even more brilliant and beautiful after spending time in the kiln, but the impersonators are quickly consumed by the fire and destroyed. Humanity-focused patriots have been turning the heat up for some time now, as each of us has seen with the current Trump administration's actions and deeds, and the responses to these from all over the world, especially from Europe, the ancestral home of the central banking mafia itself. Now, the kiln seems to be ready. The gems have been collected and cataloged, and the only thing left is for all of us to stand tall. You've heard for years that nothing can stop what is coming. As you go about your day or your night, pondering on what we've talked about in this file, I'd like each of you to spend a moment, even if it's just a minute and a half or 2 minutes, reflecting on what exactly it is that is coming. It is freedom for all of humanity that is coming. It is prosperity, abundance, and peace, the likes of which we've never known and which we've not seen for generations, that is coming. It is justice and accountability that is coming. And all of it done by the hands of God's incredible creation, our shared humanity with one another. We, the people, are inevitable. And so is our victory over thousands of years of putrid evil. I'll be back with each and every one of you again soon on the Q News Patriot Rumble and on other platforms as well. God bless everybody. Stay safe today, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.